Okay, guys upstairs, are we ready? Okay. We need to get busy because I've got a lot to cover tonight. And I want to begin with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you once again that you are with us because you promised where people gather in your name, you're there. So we claim that promise. We're grateful for it. And lead and guide us in the truth. Lord, I ask that you would open up all of our minds. In Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. All right, I'm going to give a short introduction, recap for some of those who have not been here. And so here we go. I was getting off an elevator in a convention center in Cincinnati, Ohio. There was a Cincinnati Reds baseball game just getting out across the street. I was involved with several thousand people in a convention, and I ran an exhibit in the convention hall. I was just coming down because my booth area was about to open up. At the same time, these hundreds or thousands of people are coming in from across the street to their rooms in this convention center. So I come down, my elevator door opens, and there's this lobby there, and there's probably 10 or so elevators that open into this lobby. When my door opens, I'm looking at a solid mass of people wanting to get on an elevator. You try getting off of an elevator when hundreds of people are trying to get on your elevator, squeezing against each other. So I'm going along the door, and there are these 5 or 6 really, really tall men. And they're really athletic-looking guys. And there are different races mixed in this group. And as I'm squeezing out the door, the biggest guy of the bunch steps over by me and hits me, not hard, but just taps me on my chest, right where it says Islam and Christianity Prophecy Seminars. He says, "What does that mean?" At least I'm off the elevator. I am just barely off the elevator. And I decided, here we go. And as I answered, the elevator doors closed and they missed their elevator. I said, there is this prophecy in Daniel chapter 11 that has a series of powers called the King of the North and the King of the South. It starts with the Persians in Daniel 11:2, and just like Jeremiah calls them the kingdoms of the north, we have Medo-Persia Empire, and they come into Israel from the north. I was actually using my hand because your left hand makes a good Mediterranean. Italy's even in the right spot. Israel's right there on the end of it. And there you go, you got it. After that, the Greeks come in from the north. The Greek Empire splits 4 ways. But Daniel only cares about 2 of them in this prophecy. He mentions a 4-way split, but only talks about 2. Seleucid north, Ptolemy south, and you have Jerusalem caught in the middle between them for several centuries of war. Then you have the Roman Empire, and we have Pompey come in, leading the Romans in from the north. They take Jerusalem from the north. Then the Roman Empire splits multiple ways, and you have, it's talked about 10, but again, he only cares about 2 in Daniel 11, north and south, and you have Papal-led Christianity north, Islam south, and you have a conflict with Jerusalem caught in the middle. You have the Crusades, the Ottomans, and the time of the end. And we're now in that 3rd and final conflict. Now, I'm not going to finish it because that's what I'm going to do in the rest of this presentation. But this guy asked me several questions. To give you an idea how long it took, eventually the elevator door behind me opens again. The elevator has now come back out of its run probably, I know there were 14 flights levels in that hotel. The reason I remember that is the guy says, okay, and the whole crew, they all follow the lead of the big guy. All right? And he says, all right, and the doors open and they step in, and I watch him pull out his room card, put it in a slot on the control panel of the elevator, and he punches 14, which is the penthouse floor. You have to have a key to make the elevator go to the 14th floor. And I looked at these guys as the doors closed, and I thought, I bet you I was just talking to NBA players. They're really well built, they're tall, and they've got money. But I don't watch sports, so I don't know who I was talking to. But it is an interesting topic, and it'll get people's attention. Now, the next question is, do Muslims and Christians worship the same God? And be careful answering that, because Jesus said that real Christians, his real disciples, would love their enemies and do good to those who persecute them. And so back at the time of the Crusades, was it the jihadists or the crusaders that actually loved their enemies and did good to the other side? Neither one. So here's your answer. There are many Christians and many Muslims who are worshiping the same false god of force, fear, and anger. Do it our way or else. And if you think about history, you know that's true. You know the jihadists do that. But what about during the Inquisition and all these kind of things? Yeah, it's there. However, there are also some Christians and some Muslims who have found or are in search of the true God of love, truth, peace, and forgiveness. And Daniel 11 points out that God pulls a group out of both of them to follow Jesus Christ and the Bible. And it's not Chrislam I'm talking about. They follow Jesus Christ and the Bible, and they get caught in the middle between traditional papal-led Christianity and Islam. Now, let's take a look. What is the role of Islam in this prophecy? Well, we're going to start by looking at Daniel 11:40-43, which talks about the time of the end. Just so you know that we will be really coming into this one as our main focus. At the time of the end, the king of the south, I believe that to be Islam, shall attack him. Papal-led Christianity, traditional Christianity, the king of the north is the him here. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. It's going to be a brutal holy war. By the way, my definition of a holy war is when both sides act like the devil in the name of God. And when you act like the devil, you are of the devil, all right? Continues, he, the king of the north, shall also enter the glorious land, that's Israel, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. That's western Jordan today. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Well, Egypt actually happens to be Egypt today. All right? He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. Well, Libya was what we now call North Africa. Several countries in that. And Ethiopia, Sudan, Ethiopia, and some of the Eritrea and places like that was all Ethiopia then. So when you look at that, what you're looking at is the Muslim world. All the countries that are named as the king of the south breaks up are Muslim. It's pretty clear, just on the face of it, that we're looking at Islam here. Now, let's take a look at how this happens. You'll notice I have 633 to 637. Basically, the idea is that the Muslims sweep up with 4 armies. They come up through here, circle around, and come back across North Africa. So which way do the Muslim armies hit Israel from? They come from the south. Pretty simple. Abu Bakr was sending out those armies. So they come from the south. And in the process, in that conflict of 634 to 637, they conquered Jerusalem with armies that came from the south. Well, let's keep going. If you take a look at the map today, you're going to find this whole area in red, North Africa up into parts of Asia. That's the Muslim crescent. It is still predominantly to the south after 14, 15 centuries of conflict. This area up here that sent the Crusaders, The Christian world, still to the north, isn't it? Turkey is striped. Why? Militarily, it's aligned with the Christian world and NATO. Religiously, it's aligned with the Muslim world. Turkey's been very schizophrenic about some things. And especially today under Erdogan, the president of Turkey. We'll talk about that a bit later. So, Charles Malik, he was president of the United Nations General Assembly. He's not a nobody in world politics, okay? He is the president of the UN General Assembly. This was back in the 70s. He was ambassador to the United States from Lebanon. He was lecturing at Harvard. This guy was born as an Orthodox Christian. And Orthodox Christians started to see the problems coming before others did. And here's what he said: the only hope for the Western world lies in an alliance between the Roman Catholic Church, which is the most commonly influential, controlling, unifying element in Europe, and the Eastern Orthodox Church. Rome must unite with Eastern Orthodoxy because the Eastern Orthodox Church controls the Western Middle East. And if they don't solidify that control, Islam will march across Europe. Islam is political. The only hope of the Western world lies in a united Europe under the control of the Pope. That's interesting. He's calling for exactly what Daniel 11 is telling us is coming. But he wasn't done. And then all Protestant Christians around the globe must come into submission to the Pope, so we will have a unified Christian world. He says the only way to stop radical Islam is for the world to unite behind the papacy. Now, the logic of that actually is fairly accurate. I don't think it's a good idea, but it's logical. Why? Because the papacy was the one that pulled the Christians together and stopped Islam at the Crusades, Arab Islam. They're the ones that put a check on the spread of the Turks and the Ottoman Empire. And so he's saying, hey, this time, let's get it together faster. We know what's coming. Again, this is exactly what we've had for you. The papacy is the king of the north. The world unifies. The United States, Revelation 13, becomes the enforcer for the papal system. You'll see even more clearly again tonight how that works. So we have Northern Empire papacy. It comes from the Roman Empire, but the southern one comes from the Roman Empire as well. It's part of the breakup of Rome. Now, both have a man at the head. The Pope is the head of the Catholic faith, and he is both, a Pope is both a religious leader and a political leader, and he claims global authority. When you have a caliph or a caliphate, you have a Muslim leader who claims to be a global religious and a global political leader. So when you have a pope up north and a caliph down south, they both want Jerusalem, and they both want control of the whole world. And if both of these guys want control of the whole world, is there room for both of them on the same planet? Every time you get a king of the south, a caliphate, you have a holy war. It has never failed. And you'll watch it happen tonight. In the news stories that I'm going to show you. Antichrist means either in place of Christ or against Christ. The Pope puts himself in place of Christ, and the Caliph, or Islam, denies the divinity of Christ. They both hit different parts of the definition. They both persecute the saints. You'll recognize these as some of the points that come from those 15 characteristics of who the king of the north little horn beast power is. The thing of it is, Islam matches about 3/4 of those statements. The papacy matches all, but Islam matches many of them. It's your runner-up. King of the north is really the focal point. King of the south comes close. Martin Luther was once asked about it, and he said, well, that image of Daniel 2, it has legs of iron and feet of iron and clay. And he says, what I see is one leg goes Muslim out of Rome, and the other leg goes papacy, and they both end up being against Christ. I think he was pretty accurate. They both receive a dragon seat or capital city. The papacy gets the city of Rome, but Islam gets Constantinople, now called Istanbul. One gets the western capital, the other gets the eastern capital of the Roman Empire. Just kind of interesting how this all plays out. They both have time prophecies. The papacy has a 1260-year time of supremacy, while Arab Islam had a 5-month day for a year characteristic is 150 years. Turkish Islam, 391 years and 15 days. A guy by the name of Josiah Litch predicted that on August 11, 1840, that Ottoman Empire would fall. On August 11, 1840, it became an event that happened in Turkey, Lebanon, and Egypt, all on the same day. It became a protectorate of the European powers. Now, it didn't fall completely till the end of World War I, but from the time that it became a protectorate, it was known as the sick man of the East. In Bible prophecy, as soon as a power becomes subservient in some way to another, its reign is over. It's now just fading away. So I believe Josiah Litch was right on that. In Revelation, it has 3 woes. One woe is past, behold, still 2 more woes are coming after these things. And there are well over 100 Bible commentators from 1100 AD to the 1930s that all identified these woes as Islamic confrontations against Christianity, especially against the papal system. In the Arab phase of the first woe, which matches the first conflict of the Crusades, really, in Daniel 11, you have them take over this whole area that's shown in red of the Roman Empire. Notice, they're coming from the south and working north into the empire. Daniel 11, 29 39 talks about the second wave, the Ottoman Empire. And this would be the second woe. Now, I'm not going into great detail in all of the verses. Again, in your outline, there is more detail verse by verse, but I don't have time to cover some of that, to cover some things I really need to talk about tonight. But this is one I'm going to show you just as a clear evidence of how Daniel 11 is fulfilled in history. At the appointed time, he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. The former is the Crusades, the latter is the time of the end. The appointed time is during the Ottoman Empire. Now, on Saturday morning here, I'm going to make a presentation on the appointed time. To give you the details will take about an hour, but here is a really brief overview. There's a prophecy, time prophecy in Daniel about the 1290 and 1335, being 1290 days, meaning years, or 1335. It's from Abomination of Desolation. And there are 2 abominations of desolation in Daniel, and Jesus talks about both of them. You have 1290 years from 70 AD when Jerusalem falls. That was the abomination of Daniel 9:27. You come 1290 years, it brings you the John Wycliffe. 1335 brings you the John Huss. And between this line and this line, you have the introduction to the Reformation. Wycliffe is the morning star. Huss is the first practicing reformer. Second abomination of desolation, Daniel 11:31, is when the papacy gets the force of arms, and that's truly right around 508. Several events happening in there, but Clovis throws the military might of the Franks or the French behind the papacy as the European area is breaking into the barbarian groups. And so from that time on, 1290 years brings you the 1798 when the papacy gets its deadly wound and loses the political power to persecute. 1335 brings us right down here to 1843-44. And the interesting thing is, between this line and this line, you have the rise of both the Turks, the Ottomans, and the Reformation. They're strong, and from 1798 to 1843, you have the demise of the Turkish Empire and the Reformation. Because during this time, they're developing something called historicism for Bible prophecy, and during this time, they're giving it up. And they lose being protesters. Protestants means those who are protesting against the papal system. And they started backtracking during this time. So it's interesting. Between these lines is the appointed time. Before it is the first conflict, the Crusades. After it is the time of the end conflict. It's got the bookends. Now, so at the appointed time, he's going to head south, but he's not going to make it, is what the idea of verse 29 was. So you keep reading. Why doesn't he make it? For ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Going to head south. He's not going to make it because the ships from Cyprus. He's going to return home in a rage and attack the covenant. And give good treatment to those who aren't true to God, in other words. Okay, let's take a look. Here's how that is fulfilled very rapidly during the Ottoman conflict. The Turks were in the process of taking Cyprus in 1571 during the Venetian Wars. And the Pope says, no, I do not want to lose Cyprus for the Christian nations, because that was a really nice stopping off place. They had a military base and everything there. They controlled Cyprus, and that would be their launching pad for getting into Jerusalem. And they wanted Jerusalem back. So the Pope calls for the Holy League, and a bunch of nations come together and put a fleet of 300 ships, and their goal is to sail to Cyprus, retake Cyprus, and then go take Jerusalem. He's going to return during the appointed time, the Ottomans, and he's not going to make it because of ships from Cyprus. Well, he was trying to get to Cyprus. Here's how that happens. The Turks know what's happening. They get their fleet of 300 ships over here to Cyprus. They drop off 15,000 soldiers, and their fleet of 300, or approximately 300 ships, heads west. And the two fleets crash into each other right here in the Battle of Lepanto. In a couple of hours, somewhere around 50,000 men died in that fight. It was quite a brutal day. It was one of the larger naval engagements at that point in history. I mean, you had 600 ships involved. And the Muslim fleet was decimated, and the few that escaped, man, they got out of there. The Christian fleet was so badly damaged that it turned around and went home. Now, remember the prophecy. They're going to head back to the south against the king of the south, but they're not going to make it because of ships from Cyprus. Where did that fleet come from? Cyprus. So they returned home. They're still mad at the Turks, but they can't really take it out on them. The Turks end up basically winning. It was just barely better than a draw in the war itself. They lost the Battle of Lepanto, but they won the war. So in 1571, the Pope has this painting put up in the Vatican walls. It's celebrating the Battle of Lepanto. The Muslims are on the right because that's where the skeletons are. They lost. But he wanted right beside it a picture of retaking Cyprus and Jerusalem, but he couldn't get the fleets and the nations to put their fleets back together again to go do it. Within a year, the Muslims had their fleet rebuilt. Guess what gets put up on the papal walls the next year? 1572. We get this painting, along with the second one about it, celebrating the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, when 70,000+ Frenchmen, Huguenots, who were following the Bible as their authority, God's covenant, instead of the traditions of the church, They were double-crossed and killed in just over a week's time. And the papacy celebrated by ringing bells and putting these paintings up. The prophecy was, they're going to head south. They're not going to make it because the ships from Cyprus, they're going to return in rage against the covenant. And that's exactly what happens. The paintings in the Vatican depict it. Now get this. The Muslim fleet and the Holy League fleet in 1571, as they were sailing into combat, both believed they were fighting the battle of Daniel 11, verse 30. That was just recently rediscovered by a guy in, I believe it was Hungary, doing a doctoral dissertation, reading through all the old documents. They knew then, we forgot. They both believed that there would be a bigger battle coming somewhere in the future in Daniel 11, verse 40, at the time of the end. We're now there. Why did God allow these Islamic invasions against the Christian world? Well, the Bible actually tells us. But the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. And they did not repent of their murders or their sorceries or their sexual immorality or their thefts. Christianity in the medieval ages was not very good. What happened in Old Testament times when Israel started worshiping images and started living more like the heathen around them? Did they gain or lose protection from God? They lost it. What do you expect is going to happen in the New Testament world when Christians started erecting statues and worshiping them and picking up the morals of the world around them? Same thing's going to happen. They lose protection. God is using Islam as a discipline against the evils that were then prevalent in Christianity. God doesn't change. In the Old Testament, he would use Abrahamic family members, Edom, Moab, Ammon, Babylonians. Those are all relatives of Abraham. Guess what? Islam claims to be a relative of Abraham. God is so consistent. So you have, during the second phase, you have a German monk up here by the name of Martin Luther. And, let me back up to that. Get the right one. There we go. We have Martin Luther up here. What kept the Pope from coming up here and taking out Martin Luther? Here's what it was. We had a couple of German princes up here that were supporting him, which meant they actually have to have an army to go arrest Martin Luther. Doesn't have to be a huge one, but they have to have an army to go up there and get him. The problem is the Turks are pushing in from below. And you can't send an army up there when you even need these guys to come help you down here. They need everybody to hold this line. And once the Turks stop pushing, then the Pope starts thinking about going and get Martin Luther, but here comes the Turks again. Martin Luther looked at that for a little while and he said, my greatest defender is the Sultan of Turkey. And God used Islam to help give breathing space to get the Bible in common languages and righteous by faith to be taught again. He uses all things for good. It also tells us that there would be a deadly wound and the papacy would come back with greater power. 1798 is the deadly wound. And then we have 1929 and following, they begin their resurgence. So you can actually graph out the papal power curve, I call it, 538 and following. They grow in power, and eventually they come down in 1798, and 1929 they begin to climb again, and eventually they hit their peak of power right at the end when they come to a crashing end when God sets up his kingdom. All right? One day I was in a hotel with nothing to do. And if I'm sitting around with nothing to do, I'm usually thinking about Daniel 11. That's the way my mind works. And I realized something. I graphed the Muslim power curve right over the top of the papal power curve. And I wasn't even using any documents. It was history in my head, and I had never superimposed one over the other. And I'm amazed at what my pen was drawing. I just plotted some dates out there, and then I started drawing this, and I go, wow, look at this. You have, very similar to the papal power curve, you have Arab Islam, that weakened a little bit in the Crusades, the Turks come in. Then they come down. And then at the time of the end, you've got right around 1948, what happens? The nation of Israel is established. And the Muslims stop shooting at each other quite so much, and they start all hating Israel. Then they discover oil, and some Muslims discover terrorism. They're not the first to use it, but they start using it effectively, and they become what many consider one of the greatest threats in the world today. Would that be an honest statement? And there are others that see other things, but many see Islam as one of the greatest threats, the radical form, in the world today. Let me just also say, I want to demonstrate that the papacy has some end-time allies, and so does the papacy. Both Islam and the papacy do. In Revelation 13, we've already talked about the ally of the King of the North is Protestant United States. And I think that's especially the political right that backs traditional papal Christianity. Meanwhile, from Revelation 11, the French Revolution with Marxist socialism is the supportive of the King of the South. They both come up right in the ending of that Ottoman Empire Reformation time period and come into play for the time of the end. Everything is forming up in just the right times. Now, I'm going to present more on that one at 11 o'clock here Saturday. And why am I doing that? Telling you that there's one at 9:30 Saturday morning and one at 11? Because when I started doing a 10-day seminar, there were some things I hadn't learned yet. And there's just no way to pack all the detail into it. So I just gave you a brief overview of two things. And if you're curious, and I hope you are, you can come hear the details. That's the only way I know how to do it. Now, could it happen that Islam attacks the papacy and the U.S. and their allies? Could it happen? It is happening, right? Well, take a look at the apocalyptic views of Islam, and then you'll understand what's going on. The Sunni Muslims believe there will be a war in Syria. Excuse me, there's been one for quite a while. They think that's what's in prophecy. And it's going to lead to a time of destabilization and chaos, and out of the chaos, God will help Muslims take over the world. Shiite Muslims, Shias, believe in a 12th Imam, which is a guy who went down in a well in the 9th or 10th century, and he'll come back up at the time of the end, a Messiah-type character. And Jesus himself will show up and help them win. And he'll kill an Antichrist kind of guy called the Dajjal. And Islam, both of them believe, Sunni and Shia, that there will be, the world headquarters of Islam will be in the city of Al-Quds. And most of you don't know where Al-Quds is, but you should. Al-Quds is Jerusalem. So let me see. Is there a possibility that Jerusalem get caught in the middle when all the branches of Islam, the radicals, want to use Jerusalem as their world capital for their caliphate? Every time you have a caliphate, you have a king of the south. Do you think the Pope would just let that slide? No, never has. That's why I said every time there's a king of the south, there's a holy war. Muhammad Badia, the Muslim Brotherhood supreme guide, confirmed the necessity for every Muslim to strive to save al-Quds from the hands of the rapist, meaning Israel and the United States, and to cleanse Palestine from the clutches of the occupation, deeming this an individual duty for all Muslims. Mohammed Badias spent a lot of time in jail over the last several years since el-Sisi took control of Egypt. But the Muslim Brotherhood is the foundation of all radical Islam today. In the 1920s, the Muslim Brotherhood was established in the nation of Egypt. And it's interesting that Daniel 11 pegs Egypt as the part that's overthrown, where radical Muslims come from. That's where it started. And they all want Jerusalem as their capital. The Iranian Syrian Crisis. This is the Shiites. A high Iranian politician believes the Syrian revolution could be the catalyst for sparking the worldwide conflagration that will usher in the era of Muslim domination of the world. Now, to give you an idea that both the Sunni and the Shia are quite centered on getting Jerusalem and that things are already working. They believe the third round, the third and final crusade, they call it, has begun. Then there's Mary's predictions. Now, I got these from a book back in the 90s, a book called Thunder of Justice. And there were a group of people that were having visions of Mary around the world. And this book was a compilation of them about how Jesus was going to come around the year 2000. Whoops. That one didn't happen. But look at this prophecy. There will be a World War III, and it will be started by a man who wears the turban of the faith, a Muslim. Yet there is a more powerful one to rise in Syria, the Ahmadi, Muslim beliefs. When this one has accomplished his work, he will cause destruction and pain and great persecution. The red will flow into the sea. By the way, anybody know where Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi came from? He set up a caliphate in Syria. There will be nothing to eat. The Antichrist is going to arise from the Mohammedan race. A Muslim, he's going to have a turban. The people will call it the Eye of Satan. He will be young, wearing a long robe. He will be very intelligent and well-equipped for nuclear war, worse than Hitler, connected with communists, fire rockets at us, and some will hit New York City. Those kind of looked like rockets 20 years ago, didn't they? The explosions that followed. This was written before the year 2000. Now, most of the prophecies failed, but it would be pretty easy, I believe, for Satan to have motivated this one. Why? Daniel 11's already written. The Muslims already have their beliefs. If you're watching both of them, you could have predicted this one. And what did I tell you? That there is a link between radical Islam and the radical left. I will give you the details Saturday, as I said. But notice, even Mary seems to think so, so-called Mary. Many evangelicals, including talk show hosts like Glenn Beck, have taught that the Antichrist will be a Muslim. The Protestant prophecy guys, Tim LaHaye, Joel Richardson, Joel Roosenberg, and others. Waleed Shoebat, for sure. Now, let's go back and read Daniel 11:40 to 43 again. And I want you to notice the three-way breakup of Islam. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand. Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon, they escape. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. They go down. So that's one of the many that are overthrown. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at the king of the north's heels. So some of them end up following the king of the north. All right? So we have this one group that escapes. Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Egypt and many countries overthrown, and those who end up following. The parallel in Revelation says, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. Huh. So even Revelation is saying the same thing. There's going to be a lot of people that just follow. Take a look at a map. Ancient borders. Here we have Libya taking in North Africa, Ethiopia, this whole section down here, Egypt here, Edom, Moab, and Ammon are over here. Notice the way it's describing it, most of this is directly to the south of Israel, isn't it? Also, we're going to save Edom, Moab, and Ammon for the last part because it's good news, but radical Islam starts in Egypt. I actually believe Egypt will radicalize and fully go radical. The last totally free election in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood won. And then El-Sisi had a military coup and threw him out of office and put him all in jail. And since then, anybody who wants to run against El-Sisi runs from a prison cell when it comes to an election. So El-Sisi has won every election since, but it's kind of interesting how everybody that runs against him goes to jail before the election. So yeah, those aren't fair elections. Everybody knows it. And the young people in Egypt are fed up with him because he has gangs of undercover officers that roam the streets, and they come up to a young person and say, "Give me your phone." No. They get beat up. Now give me your phone. Open it. And if they find something they don't like on it, the young person may never be seen again. They are disappeared. Or if they're lucky, they just spend several days being tortured and then released. What do you think a young generation thinks of their leadership? Yeah. And I'm not really thrilled with it. So if there's ever another free election in Egypt, it's going to be pretty easy to guess which way it goes. But to have a free election, they're probably going to have to overthrow El-Sisi. Libya and Ethiopia. Ethiopia, what's left of that large area, is just barely majority Christian. And if there is a holy war here, them and Sudan Sudan is a lot of Muslims in Sudan, but they've already made it clear that they go with Israel in the West. Libya has a lot of oil, and Morocco is already clear they're going with the West. And so you have Libya that if they could just get rid of the radicals, they'd love to go with the West so they could make some money and get out of poverty. And so it all makes sense that it breaks the way the Bible has pointed out. So how might all of this stuff happen? Back in 2011, I wrote the book in 2010. In 2011, it was published. And in there, I had 6 expectations. I am not a prophet. Daniel is a prophet. In my understanding of Daniel's writing, I believe the following were going to happen. That radical Islam would anger the papacy. The papacy would call for war against radical Islam. The United States and its allies would be the enforcer for the papacy. That radical Islam would be overthrown, moderate Islam would follow papal-led Christianity, and some Muslims would follow Jesus in the Bible. When I was in discussion in May of 2014 with the publisher, they had my rough draft, and they decided they wanted to publish it. And I said, okay, guys, I know your history, that you're a year or two from rough draft to finished book in hand. I said, I will sign the contract under one condition. It's now May. The book will be in my hands and everybody else's hands that wants it the 1st of August this year. They usually took 1 to 2 years for that process. And they said, why are you in such a hurry? I said, I want it to still be prophecy when you publish it. I don't want it to be history. They said, okay, and we had it 3 days before the 1st of August. And now I'm going to show you that in the summer of 2014, in sequence, those events began to happen. So what you're hearing is not just a figment of some goofy guy's imagination. It is Daniel's prophecy. We went out on a limb and published a book. And then it happened. We now have a revised book and then an even newer book. The revised book is to turn some things from future tense to present tense and put in the footnotes on how it's happening. July 1, 2014. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic State stretching across Iraq and Syria, has vowed to lead the conquest of Rome as he called on Muslims to immigrate to his new land to fight under its banner around the globe. For the first time since the Ottoman Empire, we had a caliphate, a functioning one. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was claiming to be a religious and military leader globally for Islam. Not every Muslim agreed with him, but he claimed to establish it. And on day one, who was his target? Rome, the king of the north. I didn't know it was going to be that clear. The next question is, how long would it take the Pope to call for war? It only took 5.5 weeks. Now, there were all kinds of atrocities that happened during those 5.5 weeks that led the Pope to call for military action. What you will now watch is date order stories. Now, I added a couple of news stories for this presentation. References, news stories. I also deleted a bunch of them. If I had everything in here as I've watched it unfold, you'd be here a long time. So when I add, I try to delete, okay? 5.5 weeks later, August 7, 2014, Pope Francis appealed to world leaders on Thursday to help end the crisis in northern Iraq after a sweeping advance by radical Islamic State militants forced thousands of residents of Iraq's biggest Christian town to flee their homes. His Holiness addresses an urgent appeal to the international community to take action to end the humanitarian tragedy now underway. And he wanted military action. Now, on August 7, I was watching news events, and I was thinking, man, I wonder if the Pope's going to take action. And I did a little search, and boom, yep, the Pope is calling for military action. Now, most prophecy people weren't paying any attention to that because they ignored Daniel 11. But I was really excited when I saw it. It was what I was waiting for. The very next day, Obama says America is coming to help. Well, what's the next thing? The U.S. is the enforcer. Within 36 hours of the papal call for action, the United States struck the Islamic State for the first time. That's pretty quick. A couple of days later, the U.S. media and others were saying the United States just jumped in there again. The Pope really probably didn't want military action. He just said action. That was probably, he just wanted humanitarian action. That's what the Pope would have wanted. Everybody knows he's a man of peace, right? So the Pope sent out his ambassadors to make it clear he wanted military action. The Holy See's ambassador to the United Nations, Silvano Tomasi, this weekend supported U.S. airstrikes aimed at halting the advance of the Sunni Islamic State militants, calling for intervention now before it's too late. While the Vatican vocally disapproved of the U.S.-led campaign in Iraq in 2003 and the 2013 plan for airstrikes on Syria, fearing both might make the situation worse for Christians on the ground, fears of ethnic cleansing by Islamists has forced a policy change. Islamists are those who want a caliphate. And in Daniel 11, the caliphate, the king of the south, pushes against the king of the north, and the king of the north comes out in anger. That's exactly what we're watching happen. Well, over and over, the Islamic State tried to get people to assassinate the Pope. Why do radical Muslims, the Islamists, want to assassinate the Pope? Because they believe they will only get power when Allah, the way they view God, delivers them when they get into a worldwide conflagration with Christianity. What better way to really set off the holy war than trying to kill the Pope? So what does been declared by the self-declared Islamic State is clear. They want to kill the Pope. The threats against the Pope are credible. The Pope has made himself a target by speaking out against human rights abuses committed against Christians in Syria and Iraq, as well as by his approval of attempts by the U.S. to try and roll back ISIL. There are multiple plots in the past where they tried it as well, especially the Bojinga plot. I was watching March of this year when the Pope went into Iraq, wondering if the radicals would try and get him. It didn't happen. Then Jihadi John says to Obama, the dog of Rome, today we are slaughtering your soldiers, we're slaughtering the soldiers of Bashar, and tomorrow we will be slaughtering your soldiers. And with Allah's permission, we will break this final and last crusade, and the Islamic State will soon, like your puppet David Cameron said, begin to slaughter your people on your streets. Interesting statement. They consider this the final holy war. Daniel 11 considers it the third and final. They call Obama the dog of Rome. They call the United States the dog of Rome. Why is this? Because the Pope said sic 'em on August 7, and within 36 hours the U.S. bit. That makes the U.S. the guard dog or attack dog for Rome. Pope says it's wrong to equate Islam with violence. Pope Francis said that equating Islam with violence was wrong and called on leaders to issue a global condemnation of terrorism to help dispel the stereotype. You just can't say all Muslims are terrorists, just as you can't say that all Christians are fundamentalists. We all have our share of them, fundamentalists. All religions have these little groups. So the Pope is not at war with all Islam from his definition. He's only in war with the fundamentalist Islamist. But then again, Christianity has troublesome fundamentalists too. You know those Christians who follow the Bible instead of the traditions of the church? They called them heretics and burned them at the stake during the Inquisition and the Reformation. Did you catch something? The Pope says we still have these problem people around. If he's willing to take out the radical Muslims, the fundamentalists, he could be willing to take out the Christian ones. And in Daniel 11, that's exactly what happens after he takes out the Muslims. But you can see it coming when you know the prophecy. Then in 2015, we had the Charlie Hebdo incident. They came in, some terrorists, and they killed several people in the Charlie Hebdo magazine because they'd run some cartoons of Muhammad. And there were, I think it was 17 people got killed at Charlie Hebdo magazine in a gun battle at a Jewish deli. Do any of you remember that? Quite a few of you do. There was a crowd of more than 1 million people who came together to demonstrate against Islam. It included Israelis and Palestinians and Russian foreign minister, the Ukrainian. Russia and Ukraine were shooting at each other on the ground at the moment. But their leaders marched side by side against Muslim terrorism. How many of you remember within a week of that, where over 2,000 people were killed by radical Muslims? Anybody? Isn't that interesting? Many of you remember 17, but you don't know about 2,000. It's because your media in the U.S. and many other places doesn't say much about it. But I did find it on the BBC. Nigeria says the number of people who lost their lives in an assault by Boko Haram militants on the town of Baga last week was no more than 150. The Defense Ministry said this figure included many of the terrorists who had attacked the town in Borno State and faced resistance by troops. Local officials earlier estimated the number of deaths as many as 2,000. That was the accurate numbers. Nigeria has often been accused of underestimating casualty figures to downplay the threat of Boko Haram. That's nearly as bad as 9/11. But you didn't hear about it. Why not? Because those are only African Christians. And your media doesn't care about African Christians. They'll talk about race all day long. But when it comes to African Christians, they will ignore them when they get butchered. I've been up in northeastern Nigeria. I was there before this happened. We had people with machine guns standing in the doors of the building as I was presenting. They were facing out. It's not like here. 2,000 to 3,000 Christians get killed in Nigeria every year, especially up north. How often do you hear about that? It's still happening. Vatican backs military force to stop ISIS. In an unusually blunt endorsement of military action, the Vatican's top diplomat at the United Nations in Geneva has called for a coordinated international force to stop the so-called Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. He said the joint statement originated with Russia, which traditionally sees itself as a protector of Orthodox Christians in the Middle East. Oh, so in 2014, the United States and its allies step in. In 2015, the papacy is now working with Russia and their allies, all against the Islamic State, the Caliphate. And the Bible says, and all the world follows the papal system, the beast. And you can see it happening. They followed him in the Crusades and the Ottomans because they were afraid of violent Islam. Then a little later in 2015, Huffington Post, but shrewdly, methodically, and with a showman's flair, the soft-spoken 78-year-old Argentinian Jesuit priest named Pope Francis showed Thursday that he is running to become president of the planet. Then there was a mass immigration crisis. All of a sudden, Europe started really getting overrun with Muslim immigrants from the south. I don't think this wave can stop, said Sonia Licht of the International Center for Democratic Transition. The global north must be prepared that the global south is on the move, the entire global south. This is not just a problem for Europe, but for the whole world. Oh yeah, Daniel said the south will push against the north. It's happening. And in the United States, there was a guy by the name of Trump that started talking about building a wall on the southern border. And during his campaign, he was asked what he would do with radical Islam. He said, the point is, they want to do serious harm. We have to take them out. We have to take them out very, very swiftly and viciously if necessary. We've got to destroy the brand of jihad. Sounded an awful lot like a whirlwind. In Daniel 11, radical Islam will be taken out. Moderate Islam will follow papal-led Christianity, and some would follow Jesus in the Bible. That's exactly what he intended to do. During his inauguration, he said, we will reinforce old alliances and form new ones, and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. Oh, how is he going to do it? By building a new coalition, allies, moderate Muslims that would work together with the Christian world. And that's exactly how he fought the Islamic State. And he pretty well bombed them out of existence. He doubled the number of bombs and missiles hitting the Islamic State that Obama hit them with. I mean, I'm talking about per week. The bombs and missiles were doubled on an ongoing basis. On his first foreign trip, he had stops in Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the Vatican. Kind of interesting. Saudi Arabia is where the king of the south came from. Vatican's where the king of the north comes from, and Israel's the one caught in the middle. That's his first trip. He said the visit to Saudi Arabia will include a truly historic gathering in Saudi Arabia with leaders from all across the Muslim world. We will begin to construct a new foundation of cooperation and support with our Muslim allies to combat extremism, terrorism, and violence. And he did it. And just before he left office, he put together the Abrahamic Accords, where 5 Muslim nations signed normalization agreements with the Israelis. A huge event. Back in 2017, Donald Trump announced that the U.S. would officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and he would move the U.S. embassy there. But it would take several years before they would get the embassy actually opened up. Then he had second thoughts. They actually opened it up much earlier. But within a week of his statement, there was a group that gathered together in Turkey of different nations that were really opposed to it. Soleimani, commander of the Al-Quds force, says his nation is ready to support Palestinian forces in the Gaza Strip days after the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Okay, I've already told you that Al-Quds is Jerusalem, right? Does Bloomberg tell you that they're one and the same place? No. Over and over, the media will mislead you by not telling you it's the same place. They will put Al-Quds down and they'll put Jerusalem down, in this case, in the same paragraph, but they don't tell you it's the same place. That's why very few people know Al-Quds is Jerusalem. But here's what gets really interesting. Soleimani is commander of the Iranian Al-Quds force. The Jerusalem force from Iran? Yeah, remember, Iran wants to wipe out Israel. And they want to set up a caliphate of their own in Jerusalem. And so they name their special forces trained to fight outside of Iran for Jerusalem, Al-Quds. And he's willing to arm the Palestinians who are Sunni Muslims, and he's Shiite. He's willing to bridge the Gulf and help arm them and help them fight against Israel because he wants Israel. So Trump was able to unite several radical groups together in their fight against Israel in the Western world while he was trying to take them down. Saudi Arabia's powerful crown prince Mohammed bin Salman has described Turkey as part of a triangle of evil, along with Iran and hardline Islamist groups. That's all of those who want to set up a caliphate. The Saudi prince also accused Turkey of trying to reinstate the Islamic caliphate, abolished nearly a century ago when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. And Erdogan is trying to do that. In this triangle, they are trying to promote the idea that our duty as Muslims is to reestablish the caliphate, that the glory of Islam is in building an empire by force. We have no duty anymore to fight to spread Islam, but in the triangle of evil, they want to manipulate Muslims, to tell them their duty as Muslims requires the establishment of a Muslim empire. I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land, but we have to have a peace agreement to assure the stability for everyone and to have normal relations. And that peace agreement language gave the window of the go-ahead for 5 other Muslim nations to normalize with Israel. Saudi Arabia will not do it openly, but secretly they've even combined air forces in attacks against the Islamic State with the Israeli Air Force. So it's a secret agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, but it's very public between some others. Then the U.S. Embassy opened on May 14, 2018. It's not just any day. Happens to be 70 years to the day from the formation of the nation of Israel. What's so important about that? In Israel, Trump was very popular. In India, Trump was very popular. If Trump, whenever he showed up in India, hundreds of thousands of people would come out and just cheer and celebrate his presence. Why? Because Trump was very clear on his stand against radical Islam. And in Israel and in India, that is a big deal. But take a look at this coin. In the background, we have Cyrus the Great. In the foreground, we have Trump. Cyrus the Great, after 70 years of captivity, said to the Israelites, the Jewish people, Jerusalem is yours, and they rebuilt the temple. After 70 years of statehood, Trump said, Jerusalem is yours, and they believe they will rebuild the temple. This coin was designed by the temple group that is ready to rebuild at a moment's notice. They've already built all the furniture. They've got the priest ready. They've got everything ready. They just need the go-ahead to go up on the Temple Mount and set it up. This is what they thought of Trump. He's like Cyrus the Great. Because he hated radical Islam and was doing something about it. Trump warns Iran's Rouhani, threaten us and you will suffer, like no one has ever suffered in history. Rouhani was the president of Iran. Well, they didn't seem to care about that. They put out this poster. Anybody recognize the building that has an explosion happening? It's the White House. Trump said, bother us and you'll suffer like nobody's ever suffered before. So they put out a picture of an explosion hitting the White House where Trump lives. The guy holding the radio here, he's the commander of the Al-Quds force, Soleimani, the number 2 man in all of Iran. He was more powerful than the president. Only the Ayatollah was higher. He has a radio in his hand. He claimed to have over 1,000 terrorist cells in the United States. In other words, he's calling a strike. The U.S. flag is falling, and under the Farsi, in a little bit of English, it says, we will crush the USA under our feet. What do you know about Trump? Would he take that kindly or not? No. He was waiting. Then the Pope went to the United Arab Emirates. The meaning of the Pope's historic visit to the United Arab Emirates. What has changed in brief is the dual rise of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic State. The following analysis applies equally to the Emirates and to Saudi Arabia. Facing direct challenges, the Gulf states calculated that they could no longer appease Islamists and should instead crush them. That is precisely what they have done both in UAE and Saudi Arabia. The institutional authorities of Islam and the political authorities with which they are aligned have just bought themselves an institutional ally, if not a theological one. Whether the alliance keeps the theological barbarians at bay is another question. Who did they make an alliance with? The Pope. This is another step in opening the doors for the Abrahamic Accords with Israel. And United Arab Emirates was the first one to do it, with both the Pope and with Israel. So the Iranians put out a picture. Again, this was while they were actually bombing or putting lipid mines on quite a few oil tankers and stuff in the Persian Gulf. So you see these ships smoking and burning and sinking. There's one going down. They all fly either Israeli or U.S. flags. On the far side of the water is the Dome of the Rock. Can anybody tell me where the Dome of the Rock is located? Jerusalem, where they want to set up the caliphate. This is from the Al-Quds force. But take a closer look at the water. See the breakers along the edge? That's not water, is it? That's a Palestinian headscarf. Why are the Iranians supporting the Sunni Palestinians? Because they want Jerusalem. And their artwork tells you, a picture's worth 1,000 words. It's all about Jerusalem, Al-Quds, where they want to set up their caliphate, their world capital. Is it possible that Jerusalem could get caught in the middle? Then Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed. It was kind of interesting. He was killed multiple times by both the Russians and the United States. And every time he kept showing back up. But after October 27, 2019, he stopped coming back. Because the United States actually took him out in person and took DNA samples to prove it. He's gone. They replaced him with Kardash. They call him the professor. Was the king of the south finished? No, it's coming back. The Islamic State is coming back. However, it's more likely that it expands even to others, including Iran, Turkey, and Al-Qaeda. And now the Taliban can arm a whole bunch of them. So let's take a look at the growing tensions. A U.S. airstrike near Baghdad's international airport killed Soleimani, the guy that the picture said was going to call in a strike on Trump. Trump seemed to remember. All the previous administration said it was too dangerous and too volatile to take out Soleimani, and Trump said take him out. And they did. Defense Department said it killed Soleimani because he was actively developing plans to attack American diplomats and service members in Iraq and throughout the region. 4 days earlier, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad was attacked, and on the walls, the attackers painted Soleimani sent us. 4 days later, Soleimani was dead. Oh, continuing. It also accused Soleimani of approving the attacks on U.S. Embassy in Baghdad earlier this week. Soleimani led the paramilitary Revolutionary Guards Quds, or Jerusalem Force. This AP story is one of the few places I have ever seen them identify Al-Quds in Jerusalem. Then on January 7, the United States went to war with Iran. You may not remember that it did. Because it didn't. It almost did. This was actually headlines from around the world, including its war. What happened on the night of January 7, the Iranians launched a wave of missiles to hit 2 American bases in Iraq. And Trump had made it clear that if any Americans die, 58 targets in Iran would be wiped out, 1 for each hostage during the Jimmy Carter years. And those targets would include religious, cultural, and military. In other words, forget Geneva rules of war, we're going holy war against you if 1 American dies. Those missiles did hit American bases. They were not all stopped. 50 to 100 American soldiers received concussions that night from being right underground when the missiles blew up above them. But nobody died, and Trump held fire. That's how close we came to an all-out war. During the night, the Iranians actually accidentally shot down a Ukrainian passenger plane in Tehran, in Iran. Canada lost more than anybody else that night. There were a lot of Canadian citizens on board that flight that night. But we almost went to war. A few days later, in the Dome of the Rock, an Alaska preacher is preaching. Siam can be seen telling the enthusiastic crowd that 3 prophecies would soon be fulfilled, that the rightly guided caliphate will be established, that Jerusalem will be liberated and established as its capital, and that Islam would achieve world domination. They haven't changed in the slightest. Last fall, the caliphate returns, the United Kingdom son. ISIS is taking over huge swaths of Africa and coming back in other places. Terror slaughter. ISIS fanatics behead 50 men and boys on Mozambique football pitch before chopping them up and kidnapping every woman. Oh, is Mozambique in northern or southern Africa? Southern. The Islamic State has spread a long ways now. Civil war is brewing. Serving French soldiers send Macron, their president, another chilling warning following earlier letter from retired generals calling for military action against Islamists. They say France is about to have a civil war because there are so many Islamists living in France. Netanyahu vows Hamas will pay a heavy price for rocket fire. They got hit by hundreds of rockets back in May. The idea was Hamas, a terrorist group, is trying to take over from Abbas, and they said, watch, we will defend Jerusalem, we will get it back. And so they attacked. Meanwhile, remember I said there tends to be a link to the political left with Islam? When Israel and the Palestinians went to war, the radical left in the U.S. Congress supported the Palestinians, and the center left supported Israel. That's an interesting split. When Soleimani was killed, the radical left in U.S. Congress, along with radical Islam all over the world, was upset about Soleimani's death. Moderate Muslims all over the world were quite happy with it, but quiet, and centrist left, the center-left politicians in the U.S., were quietly happy about it. Notice the parallel between moderate Muslims, moderate left, radical Islam. Some Democrats, okay, I just got into that. Senator Lindsey Graham, this is July, not too long ago. Lindsey Graham warns All Israel News that the IDF, Israeli Defense Force, may have to launch preemptive strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities soon. Biden's refusal to get tough with Tehran is forcing Israel into a nightmare scenario, Graham said, adding, "I've never been more worried about Israel having to use military force than I am right now." At that point, back in July, the end of July, it was estimated that Iran was possibly 10 weeks from a nuclear breakout. We're getting close. And Israel has made it clear they will not allow Iran to go nuclear, because Iran said they will wipe Israel off the face of the map. 2 other nations before. Libya tried it, some planes flew over, and they no longer had nuclear facilities. Everybody knew Israel did it, but Israel said no comment. Syria started developing nuclear capabilities. Some planes flew over, they no longer had nuclear capabilities. Everybody knew Israel did it, but Israel said no comment. Now Israel flat out says, if nobody stops Iran, we are going to. And Iran has positioned well over 100,000 missiles around Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and other places that are to be launched if Israel attacks Iran's nuclear facilities. And Israel is still willing to attack to stop it. It is so serious that the Israeli pilots a couple of years ago, when they looked at it then, and now they're looking at it again, but I know a couple of years ago, the pilots were told that when they are ordered to take off, that special teams of Israelis will go to their homes and put their families in safe spots. Why is that important? Because otherwise, those pilots know what's going to happen to Israel while they're in the air. And to keep their pilots' minds on their job, they promise special teams to take care of their families. How serious does a nation have to be to plan that way? And that's close, folks. And the media is pretty quiet about that one. It's there if you look. Meanwhile, Nigeria, murder count, 3,462 Christians killed by Muslims in the first 200 days of this year. Where's your media on that one? What will the Taliban takeover mean for the Middle East? Middle East leaders are, this is Al Jazeera, a Muslim group. Middle East leaders are closely watching Afghanistan and making their conclusions about the unreliability of the U.S. as a partner. Foreign fighters are flocking to Afghanistan to launch a new terror war on the West as the Taliban tears through the country. And it only got worse. China actually said, watch what's happening. And for Hong Kong and Taiwan, nobody will help you when we take over. Last week, over Taiwan, they flew 3 nuclear bombers over, just saying, watch us, we can do what we want to you. Nobody will help you. And as I mentioned, the political right leans north to papal-led Christianity. The political left leans south towards radical Islam. And just remember, communism is the ultimate leaning left, Marxist socialism. So with that in mind, when radical Islam is overthrown, I believe the radical left will be overthrown. Moderate Islam, will follow the king of the north. The moderate left will follow the king of the north. They're allies. And then some escape and follow Jesus in the Bible from both. With that in mind, let's finish reading some statements. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. Is that making sense? That we've probably already begun and that it's about to get a lot worse? Crisis Magazine, conservative Catholic group. Not since the Cold War have we experienced such violent political, cultural, and spiritual unrest. Not since the Civil War has our country been divided so bitterly against itself. Our civilization is under attack from the far left within and radical Islam without. Oh man, even the conservative Catholics realize who's attacking them. The same powers of Bible prophecy of Daniel and Revelation. And again, I'm going to unpack Revelation 11 to show you how that is the political left. Again, yesterday, from The Stream, a conservative Christian news outlet that is off, many of them are Catholic writers. You can get an idea of their political right, can't you? Joe Biden succeeded where Benedict Arnold failed, and our deep state was in on it. Here's what they're saying. Al-Qaeda's $85 billion reward for 9/11. Our elites sold out their country and put in office a man compromised by China, who handed over to that virus hub and its allies, not just Afghanistan, but $85 billion in military equipment. That's the bounty Al-Qaeda has just collected on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 for attacking our country and my hometown. This guy's from New York City. Interestingly, $85 billion. Only 2 countries on this planet spend more than $85 billion a year on their military. The United States and China. The Taliban just got a greater investment than Russia puts into its military in a year. Does that put it in perspective? And Joe Biden handed it over, and the deep state supported him after lying him into power. Our very tippy-top, astronomically high elites have sold us and bound us over to our enemies. If we don't purge them now, we deserve what happens next. The political right is against both the political left and Islam, and they're looking to come roaring back in. Also, yesterday, from The Stream, President Trump is calling on Americans to turn to God and to join in 21 days of prayer. In a video recorded for Sunday's Day of Prayer for America event with Gold Star families in Washington, D.C., he said the only way to answer the evil we face that day is by turning to God. In the end, there's only one true answer to the death and evil we saw on September 11, 2001. It is God that is the answer, who stood tall over the wreckage at Ground Zero, where rescuers forged the mighty steel cross from the fallen tower's broken beams. It is the same sight that was seen hundreds of miles away in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where the first spontaneous memorial to the heroes of Flight 93 was a simple but beautiful wooden cross. Turning to God, he said, is the answer to evil. And it truly is, except there is a danger when the political right is using God for political power. And in that presentation I have Saturday at 11, I'm going to show you from prophecy that both are dangerous. And you need to understand that clearly. Biden did release a little video for 9/11. He didn't speak anywhere live as far as the speech. As Breitbart noted, he took the time to complain about the dark forces in America who showed resentment and violence against Muslim Americans, and to tout the peaceful religion of Islam. This, as the Islamic Republic of Iran was launching drone bombs towards U.S. troops in Iraq to commemorate the 9/11 anniversary. You get a feeling we're living in a somewhat crazy world? And there have been some of us that are saying, the left, radical left and radical Islam end up working together. And it just keeps getting clearer and clearer and clearer. And we've also been saying that the right and the papacy end up working together. And it's getting clearer and clearer and clearer. Meanwhile, God's people are always going to get caught in the middle. And we've got this group of Muslims that escape by trusting in Jesus Christ. I'm going to end with the good news tonight. Daniel 11:41. These shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and Ammon. In 12:1, just a couple of verses later, and it says, and at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Now the word for escape in the Hebrew is the same in both of these places. Escape and delivered, it's the same word in Hebrew. So the second one in 12:1 is about when God delivers his people, and since it's the same word in Hebrew, it ties Edom, Moab, and Ammon to the people that God will deliver when he sets up his kingdom. We'll take a look at the parallel in Revelation 17. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life when they see the beast. Revelation says right at the end, everybody follows the beast, papal-led power, except those in the Lamb's book of life. Well, in Daniel 11, you have Edom, Moab, and Ammon, they don't follow. And they're not overthrown, which means they have to be in the Lamb's book of life. They have to be followers of Jesus. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. And they shall not escape, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. The people who escape are those who are trusting in Jesus. Amos 9:11 and 12. On that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down, and repair its damages, and rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the Gentiles who are called by my name. That's repeated in Acts 15:16 and 17. So the Davidic king is Jesus, but it says in that time, even Edom would be a part of that remnant. And it's Edom, Moab, and Ammon that escape, and Gentiles. So let's take a quick look at the map. We have Jerusalem, but to the east of it we have Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And if you go back to the Davidic kingdom, remember Jesus is going to restore the Davidic kingdom. You draw the borders, and notice that Edom, Moab, and Ammon are a part of the Davidic kingdom. They're a part of the Abrahamic family. What is God saying? There is a group of Muslims that join in with his Israel of faith. They become a part of the Davidic kingdom. Radical Islam goes down. Moderate Islam follows papal-led Christianity, and some follow Jesus in the Bible. It's spectacularly good news. Then there's Joel 2:28. And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And by the hundreds of thousands, Muslims are having dreams and visions of Jesus. Isa, the righteous one, the man in white. And he comes to them and he tells them that they need to trust him as their Lord and Savior to forgive their sins. And he tells them they need to follow the Bible and its teachings as their authority. And they do, by the hundreds of thousands. It's happening in Iran. It's happening in Afghanistan. Yes, even there. I have a friend that leads an underground movement with over 500,000 Muslims in Muslim countries that are following Jesus in the Bible. They don't call themselves Christians. They call themselves followers of Isa, Jesus, and the Bible. They're people of the book. You see, in Islam, there are true people of the book that are to be respected. But if you call yourself a Christian, that means you are a crusader, a follower of the Pope. And you will be seen as a traitor and killed. But if you're a true person of the book, you're to be respected according to the Quran. So they say, we're Muslims. Muslim means surrendered to God. We're Muslims that are following Jesus in the book. By the way, when I walk into a mosque, and I often have, you want an interesting day, walk into a mosque with me. Unannounced, to explain this to them. I do that when I'm in a big city and I'm about to do a seminar and I'm afraid that they're going to be nervous about it and they might come out and protest, so I go there before they come to me. And I walk in and I introduce myself as a true person of the book, a follower of Jesus and the Bible. I don't want them thinking I'm a follower of the Pope, because I'm not. I do the same thing. By the way, my friend, I said, has over 500,000 Muslims that are following Jesus and the Bible. Quite a few of those were in Afghanistan. It's some of his people that I know of that have been killed. He sent me an email and said they've already lost people they work with. He's trying desperately to get some of them out, but not all of them are even willing to leave. Some of them will risk their lives to share the gospel. Don't call them cowards for saying they're Muslims that are following Jesus and the Bible. They're giving their lives for it right now. The Taliban still doesn't like them. There's an interesting Muslim teaching. The Jews were divided into 71 sects, one of which is in paradise and 70 are in the fire. The Christians were divided into 72 sects, 71 of which are in the fire and one in paradise. My Ummah, Islam, will be divided into 73 sects, one of which will be in paradise and 72 will be in the fire. Did you just catch something? Even in Muslim teachings, it says that there are some Christians that follow God, some Jews that follow God, and some Muslims that follow God. I can show them the same now in Scripture in Daniel 11. And I can challenge them. It's time to follow Isa and the book. It's kind of fun to watch what's going on. So what should a Christian do? Need to remember that both Islam and the King of the North, the King of the South, papacy and traditional Christianity and Islam are not necessarily your friend if you're truly following Jesus and the Bible. Because they have both persecuted people of faith that are truly trying to follow the Bible. The Inquisition, King of the North, killed millions of Christians that were simply trying to follow the Bible, but the Pope called them heretics and killed them. Muslims have killed millions. What happens if you love both sides? Which side will love you? Neither, once it gets into a holy war. But God's people are never given permission to hate anyone. So your job is to love people on both sides, knowing that Jesus will walk with you. He knows what it's like to be in the middle. He walked it for 31 years before his death. He died in the middle, and he's coming back to rescue his people that are caught in the middle. So a Christian, a true Christian, a follower of Jesus, needs to be really careful to walk right down the middle with Jesus and not go with a political answer left or right, but follow Jesus right down the middle. Romans says, now it's high time to awake out of sleep. For now our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Therefore let us cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the armor of light. And I am one frustrated person because I believe that we are getting very, very close and the world is sound asleep. We put out brochures and other things. Only a few of you show up. I just showed you how it's all happening. It's not a figment of imagination. The time is here to wake up. Share this with other people. They won't come here. If you believe it, you're going to have to take it to them. Get a DVD set, whatever. If you need to, grab a bunch of these brochures, scribble out the dates and times and place and put your home address in it and write down the time and place you're going to show it in your house and you share it with your friends. Simple enough? If it makes sense to you, share it with somebody. It's time to get really serious about Jesus. So what comes next? King of the North gets attacked by the King of the South. He takes down the King of the South. Leaves papal-led Christianity in control. What comes next? That's what we look at for the rest of the seminar. And what happens next is it takes one piece after another that papal-led Christianity has taken away Christians from following God's word, and it brings us back to them, one right after another. What do we need to be doing to live through this time? And it'll bring us to that one after another. It's amazing what this prophecy does, and I hope that you will be willing to look at it. The next one is tidings from the east and the mark of the beast. And if you would, put a number 5 on your response envelope. Yes, no, or question. Islam is the king of the south in Daniel 11 because it came from the southern part of the Roman Empire, invaded Israel from the south, and has fulfilled all aspects of the prophecy so far. If you agree with that, yes. You disagree, no. You're not sure, question mark. And number 2, both the king of the north and the king of the south have persecuted God's people of faith. Yes or no? Number 3, radical Islam will be overthrown while moderate Islam will follow after papal-led Christianity, the king of the north. In other words, you have this three-way split going on. Radicals are overthrown, moderates follow the papacy. Number 4, God has a people who will truly follow Jesus in the Bible. God is calling his people out from both king of the north Christianity and Islam. So God is calling his people to take a stand from both and love all sides. Yes, no, or question mark. And number 5, yes, no, or question, and I hope it's a yes. I will follow Jesus and what the Bible teaches. I hope that for each and every one of you. Again, tomorrow night, tidings from the east and the mark of the beast. Let's have a word of prayer as we close. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for Jesus and your word. Lord, there's a lot here. But Lord, it's already happening. And our world around us doesn't even seem to care or notice. Even the Christians around us don't seem to care or notice. And so, Lord, I ask that you'd help each person here to share it with those around them. In Jesus' name I ask it and I thank you. Amen.